Hello and welcome to I Didn't Sign Up for This, the show where we talk about everything that we did or did not sign up for. Carrie, what's going on?
Hey, Tim. Well, I want to talk about one word tonight. It's an F word, and the F word is forgiveness.
Oh, I was excited for a minute there.
Not that F word. I want to talk about forgiveness because I believe that that is a barrier for people. And if we don't learn to forgive and acknowledge the need to forgive, it will be a barrier for our progression when we're trying to move into a new life or something more than what we have today.
Okay, so define that for us. What is forgiveness? I mean, what are the semantics of that word for you?
Well, I'm going to share a story. So my dad, when I moved from middle school to high school, my dad was gone. He was out of the picture for about 5 years. And he and my mom decided to get back together. And they got back together when I was in 8th grade. We moved to South Carolina. And they decided to reconcile. And we were going to be a family again. Now, when he left, when I was 8 years old, I went through a time where I kind of lost my childhood a little bit because I was the oldest at home. And I had to take care of a sister that was 5 years younger than me and a brother that was 7 years younger than me. And here I am, 8 years old. Obviously, I'm not taking care of them by myself. We spent quite a bit of time at my grandmother's, but my mom had to work quite a bit. And with that, I was absolutely that latchkey kid. I would get off the bus in front of my house and use the key and go in. And I remember bringing the dogs in the house so that I would have company. And my mom was working so hard. She was working 2 jobs to take care of 3 kids and a house and everything else that came with that. And all of a sudden, my parents just out of the blue announced to us that they were going to get back together. Well, my younger brother and sister were so excited about it. I was 13, had the preteen attitude. I was pretty feisty. And I remember sitting at the dinner table one night and I wanted to talk about where he had been and all of the things that had happened over the last 5 years because I needed to reconcile that somewhere in my head. I needed to understand why my dad left and why at 8 or 9 years old, I was mowing a half an acre lot and taking care of 2 small kids at my grandmother's house pretty much most of the time whenever I wasn't in school. And so you compile that with the fact that I was absolutely that 13-year-old that was feisty and I had a very smart mouth, as a lot of teenagers do. I remember my parents looking at me and saying, we won't ever talk about that. We won't ever mention it. It happened. It's in the past. We're going to look forward. So there was no reasoning for me. And year over year and month over month and all the time, it really put a wedge between my dad and I and the relationship that we had because I blamed him for so much. I was so angry with him. I was angry with him for the way he left, the way he came back, the way that I resented that I had to try to be an adult at, such a young age and try to help be a co-parent at such a young age. And it was very difficult for me to let it go. And I think as difficult as it was for me to let it go, it was difficult for him not to let it go. And so that created a pretty bad relationship for us. And I remember I was grounded most of high school. So I hated him. I remember writing in my diary that I hated him, that I wish he had never come back, that I loved my mom and the relationship I had with my mom was great, but I hated my dad. And then at 19, he died. And before he died, when he was on his deathbed, when we were sitting there reconciling everything, he looked at me and he said, I'm sorry that you hated me. And he referenced that diary entry. So he had found the diary and he had read this entry that, my 16-year-old angry self had written about my father. And then he was gone. So it was very easy for me to look at him when he looked at me and he said, can you ever find it in your heart to forgive me? I looked at him and I said, Dad, I already have. And it allowed us in those final days to at least bond a little bit more than we probably had since I was 8 years old. And although I was able to forgive him, it took me 15 years to forgive myself. And so when we talk about forgiveness, it's important to forgive others. We know that. But it's also equally important to forgive ourselves for not being perfect. Now, I'm going to back it up a little bit, and I want to talk about the relationships that we have with other people. And we've talked a lot about intention. We've talked about what that looks like in projecting our intentions or projecting our perception of what should be done in any given situation onto the people in our lives. And with that, when they don't live up to it, there's an unbalance that happens in a relationship when you expect something from someone and they don't give it to you. And you have to forgive them because everybody is doing what they can to live the best version of themselves. And I would venture to say that it's easier to forgive other people than it is to forgive ourselves. There's so many times in life where we are our own worst critic. I mean, a hair's out of place, or I have a chipped nail, or my makeup is under my eyes, and obviously I'm speaking from a woman's perspective. Most men probably don't do that, although, some maybe do. But, we wear tons of makeup and we go to the salon and we do all these things to look so good on the outside, but on the inside, we're ignoring that child that needs to be forgiven for not being perfect. And it was a very difficult thing, but I remember sitting down to have a conversation with my mom. And in that moment, I realized that I had to let it go, that I had to let go of all of the pain, because to bring it up after so many years, there would be no resolution. And so there is no resolution for what has happened in your past. There is only the opportunity to forgive yourself for how you responded and how you reacted, and close that door and pull the lesson out of it to make you a better person in the now, in the present.
Okay. That's a lot to digest. All right. Observations. First of all, back when I was running the company that I sold here a few years back, and it wasn't a big company, but it wasn't a small company by any stretch of the imagination. It had about 125 employees, right? And so I literally had a line at my door from about 9:30, 10 o'clock. I'd have 2 or 3 people just kind of hanging out who needed to talk to me about something. And 99 out of 100 times, it was about something emotional kind of going on in their lives, and they had wronged someone or been wronged or whatever it was. As a matter of fact, I had this little leather chaise in the office that the team there lovingly referred to as the Freudian couch. Almost without fail, we had this running joke. Somebody would walk into my office. There was exactly one other place to sit down besides my chair, and that was the Freudian couch. They sat on the Freudian couch, and I would open the conversation by saying, "Tell me why you hate your father." Right? And that's... So, like, every conversation we had started with, "Tell me why you hate your father." Right? And it's not that we really necessarily hate our fathers or hate our parents, but everybody has this moment. It sounds like yours was a lot more dramatic than most, but everyone has this quintessential coming of age moment. I remember my own. I remember being about 30 years of age and hugging my dad. I had been out to see him out to the coast, out to the shore, and I knew I probably wouldn't see him again for 6 or 8 months. And he gave me a hug and he teared up a little bit. And at 30 years of age, which would have made him, late 50s, I realized that he's a human being who has his own hopes and dreams and wishes, who's putting his pants on one leg at a time and is going through life at exactly the same pace that I am. Meaning, Today is the first day that he has ever really lived. That doesn't make a ton of sense. So if he's 10,000 days old, today is 10,334. It's his first 10,334th day. And so he's learned a lot, but at the same time, he's just making it up as he goes along. We're all making it up as we go along, right? We're taking what we've learned, we're applying it to what's going on in our lives in the now, and then we're making decisions and doing what we do. So short story is, people screw it up, right? They make all of these mistakes and they live in this world of rampant confusion a great deal of the time. And so ultimately, our path to happiness involves forgiveness, as you've pointed out. But you don't just forgive the bad things. You got to forgive the good things as well.
What do you mean?
I mean, okay, so here's my dad. I'll use my own dad as an example. He's since passed away. But there are things that he did, choices that he made, which were just really, really bad choices. Choices that really hurt me and my brothers. My younger brother especially, mostly just through neglect. I mean, he was so involved in his own life and his own world that he made some really crappy choices. And, we oftentimes didn't have food to eat, or if we did get food to eat, it was based on our own efforts. And I don't hold it against him. It's made me who I am, very self-sufficient, and I pride myself on that self-sufficiency. But at the same time, he's made some terrible choices. And anybody would kind of look at the life and look at the choices that he made in the moment, in the throes of his own struggle, just doing the best that he can with whatever he had, and say, gosh, you just must absolutely hate him. No, I love him. I love him from the depths of my soul. I absolutely adore this man, right? Because if I am to forgive the horrible things that he did, then I have to logically realize all of the really fun, amazing, great things that he did are also in that spectrum of what needs to be forgiven. And so I guess the short story is I can't grind him under my boots, but I also can't put him on a pedestal. I've got to put him side by side with me, shoulder to shoulder, and realize that he is a man living his life. And when the sun came up this morning, that was the first time that he'd ever seen this day. Same as me, same as you, same as everyone.
Right.
Realize that he's going to take all of his experience in life and use that as a barometer to define what he does or does not do in this day, same as all the rest of us. And so hopefully you pick up a little bit of knowledge, and if you're really lucky, you pick up some wisdom, and you're going to apply that wisdom to the brand new sunrise, brand new day. What do I do? Well, I look back and say, what have other days like this taught me? And then I apply that to the day that I'm living, hopefully to make it a better experience, more enjoyable or more fulfilling in whatever means. But I mean, for every story I've got of him, neglecting us, I've got stories of him just doing absolutely crazy things.
Yeah.
Right? Just like fun, maddening, wonderful, just, growing up with this pirate for a father. And we're just, oh my God, it was so good. And it was so bad. So bad. But God, it was good. It was so good. Unspeakably just powerful, joyous, crazy. I mean, I've seen him get into a 22, 23-foot aluminum hulled boat and take it just way too far offshore, right? When when trough to crest of the waves you're facing are half again as long as your boat, you are in a peanut hull out there, right? And we did all these crazy, just insane, stupid things just to be and feel alive. And he had this unabated sense of self-confidence. He just knew that he could get us back. Well, what if the engine goes out? Well, one time the engine did go out. He still got us back.
Wow.
He still got us back. He figured it out. He figured out the fix. He found someone to help out on the open sea. And
that's crazy.
So I have all of these incredibly wonderful stories, and I have all of these incredibly trying, troubling stories about growing up in his home. And the only way that I get peace is by really kind of letting go of both sides. If I overvalue one, I put him on a pedestal. And if I overvalue the other, then I vilify him. I make him this horrible person. And the fact of the matter is, he's not. He's not worthy of vilification. He's just a person.
I think that's something that we all have to do. And we all, to your point, we all hit that moment in life. And my dad we had amazing family memories too. I just think that there was that underlying tension and it's about forgiving me for not being perfect and being so hard on myself because I did what I did and I said what I said and I think everybody does that. So it's very possible that your dad felt that, my dad felt that,
Sure.
Mom felt that, whoever felt that. And you have to let it go. Nobody is a villain and nobody is a saint.
I agree. As a matter of fact, I've often said this, that the devil himself thinks that he's the good guy here.
That's a good point.
He truly, in his heart of hearts, thinks that he's right. And he's the good guy. He's just trying to liberate mankind. He's just trying to help. People are really not villains at any stretch. We do villainous things. We do horrible things. We make terrible, terrible decisions from time to time. But the purity of our intent is always there, right? Our heart is always in it. I mean, barring something like, psychopathy or whatever, right? I'm not talking mental illness necessarily. But on the other side of that, if you're just run-of-the-mill, mainstream, sort of normalized person, your intent is good. You want to help and participate and be a part of things, and you want to see other people happy. And you're convinced that they will be happy if they will just do things your way. But since they won't do things your way, you have got to create a world that forces them to do things your way. And then the next thing you know, you're wearing a swastika, right? I mean, that's what happens.
Yeah, no kidding.
You think you're right. You think you're right. We all think we're right. And we'll work very hard to maintain that belief and to prove, in fact, that our way is the right way. That's why I say you've got to forgive both sides of it. You can't just forgive the evil. You got to forgive the good as well. Because if you use the good, if it's a balance, right? If it's a scale, it's Lady Justice. And so she holds the scale and there's weight on one side and weight on the other, and we're weighing things out. Then you can always circle back around and do enough of what you perceive to be good to justify the really crappy things you did. And then you live in a world where the end justifies the means. And in the world where the end justifies the means, you have absolute pandemonium. You have Mao Zedong, you have Stalin, you have Hitler, right?
Right. That's where things get dangerous. Everybody's trying to justify their actions, good or bad. I get that.
You kill people, millions of people.
Right.
And that, granted, that's only if you're in some position of power that you have created in your own life through whatever means. But to start weighing it out and saying, yeah, he did murder this whole family, but he was such a great guy when we were fishing. It just doesn't work. And the example is fairly absurd, granted, but any amount of this justifies that, and you create a world where you feel like you have to use the end to justify the means. But the means can be awful. The means can be brutal, heinous, in fact. And it just does not work to develop and maintain a culture. Every culture that has ever existed that works under the mantra, the end justifies the means, has failed miserably, with dead people counting in the tens of millions.
Oh, I believe that. I'm not surprised by that at all. Because you can't justify your actions to the point that you are causing harm or a lack of compromise. I mean, when you live in a society, every relationship we have requires compromise on some level. And I can verify, I can assure you that if you're not compromising on some level in the relationships that you have, you won't have those relationships very long.
Compromise and what you want are permanently, inexorably linked. Compromise is an integral part of what you want. I often say, do you want what you want, or do you want it the way you want it? Because so many people fall in that trap. They define what they want, but then rather than just having that thing or event or occurrence that they want and being satisfied with that, they circle back and decide, well, really, I want it in a certain way. It's not enough to have breakfast in bed. I want it on a silver platter.
Well, who doesn't?
But the thing is, if you are taking your breakfast in bed and you're throwing it on the floor out the window because it did not come on a silver platter, chances are you're not going to get round two of breakfast in bed.
Ever.
That husband, that spouse, that significant other, whoever's doing it for you, they're not going to stop and run look for a silver platter and do some more Eggs Benedict. It's not going to happen. And you won't ever have to worry about it being served to you ever again, even as an attempt. And so do you want what you want, or do you want it the way you want it? Many, many, many people want what they want, but they also desperately must have it the way they want it. Meaning, I want there to be peace between us, but I want you to initiate the apology.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Because it's somehow beneath me. I have been wronged. I'm the victim here. And if you don't initiate the apology, then there will never be peace between us. When in fact, if what you want is peace between us, then who gives a rat's behind who initiates that? Go get it. Go create it.
I agree with that. I think that it comes from a place of anger. And when you fail to compromise, or you're going after things the way that you want them as opposed to what you want, to your point, that comes from a place of inability to compromise and having everybody bend to your perspective or your point of view or your demands. And it's a negative space for everybody involved, because ultimately you're going to respond to each other. In that hypothetical scenario, you're going to respond to each other in a negative way. If your spouse brings you breakfast and you throw it on the floor because it's not on that platter, your spouse is going to feel that they're not valued. You're going to be angry. There's a mess on the floor that needs to be cleaned up. Neither party is going to clean it up. I mean, it doesn't end well for either party. And it takes something positive and puts it in a negative light and a negative space. And I will tell you that most people, if that's done over and over and over again, eventually they hit a wall where you can't come back from that. You've burned a bridge. And that's why there's divorce. That's why there are friends who were friends for years who suddenly haven't talked in years, because there's a lack of compromise and a lack of forgiveness for not being who I expect you to be. I've dated a couple of guys that, although I acknowledged the lesson that they were in my life and the fact that I dearly loved them for the time that they were in my life, I also had to forgive them for not being the person that I needed them to be and ultimately having to end the relationship. And I'm sure that there are people out there who I have dated that have felt the same about me. It's a disconnect, and it leads to a dead-end road if you can't stop that cycle and stop that pattern.
Okay, so it occurs to me that in all of this sage advice, I have created a logical dichotomy. Meaning, and just bear with me here for a second.
Yeah, for sure.
I start with the notion that the end never justifies the means. And then I follow up with the notion of just get what you want and forget about the way you want it, which is, in fact, the means.
Well, I think I see what you're saying, but I think in context, the end doesn't justify the means when it is doing harm to a person or people or community or society. And my understanding of the second point is it's okay to compromise if you can come to a decision where both parties are happy and you're able to get what you want. It may not be the way that you want it, but ultimately it is what you want.
Okay, good save.
So I think they're two totally separate things. Now, if you were to apply, do you want what you want or do you want it the way you want it, to the first principle where you're potentially doing harm? Absolutely, there's an issue there. But it comes back to how you treat the people in your life and how you treat yourself. Forgiveness is important, and it's important to forgive everyone. That does not mean that I need to forgive you and open the door for you to come back into my life. And so you can forgive people and close a door without self-sacrifice. So the whole concept of turn the other cheek, I will tell you, I must be a fairly prideful person, and I probably should work on that. But the turn the other cheek scenario for me, the story, I struggled with that most of my life. I still don't necessarily agree, because it's very hard for me to turn the other cheek when I get fired up or when I'm upset about something. And that doesn't mean I'm malicious. That doesn't mean that I come out, swinging, or I'm a fighter, because I'm not. I actually hate conflict, and it makes my stomach hurt.
Right.
I have a literal physical response to conflict. It makes me physically ill to deal with conflict. And that's something that I've had to work through, because there's conflict. You can't avoid it in life. But when someone does something that needs to be forgiven, it's okay to forgive them and understand that they are doing the best that they can, and close the door and walk away from it. I don't have to forgive you and then let you back in where you were before.
Okay, yeah, I agree with that. I really agree with that. Wow. I've had a similar situation in my life, which I'm not going to delve into. It's too personal. But I've had situations in my life wherein, somebody does something that, okay, I described it to this person as this, okay? And I'll let you fill in the blanks, and intelligent people can probably fill in the blanks, but something happened between me and this other person that, it was very challenging to forgive. It was very challenging to let go of. It felt like a betrayal. And ultimately, forgiveness was given, and everything is kind of okay now. But it's not the path that it was on. And the example that I used was, imagine you are hiking up this switchback trail to the top of a mountain. And then the event happens. And the event, by virtue of it, kicks you off the trail. And so now you stand 200 feet from the summit looking at a straight, glassy cliff face, one that cannot be scaled. And so whereas the path you were on would have led to the summit, the top of the mountain, now you are relegated to just shy of the top of the mountain by virtue of your actions. Does that make sense, or is that too cryptic?
No, it does. I get it.
Okay.
It basically changes your path, right?
It changes your path. You do these things. You can be forgiven for these things, absolutely. But it changes the path that you are on. And so there's no way to get back to the old path. And this path leads, instead of to the summit, it leads to the cliff just below the summit that just cannot be scaled. And so you will never summit the mountain by virtue of the choices that you've made. You've made some poor choices that preclude you from ever attaining that goal of being where you would have been had those choices not been made. And that's just life. I always say, if you stay on this road that we're on, we're going to wind up where it's headed. And that's true for good and bad, all the way around. If you're on the right road that's leading to your greater good, stay on the road. Just stay on the road and you'll be fine. If you're on another road that's going to lead to pain and hurt and betrayal, then, get off that road. But if you stay on that road, you will absolutely wind up where that road leads.
Oh, I believe that. And you have to understand too that once you're at a point where there's no turning back and you never can get to ideally where you wanted to be prior to, it's never the same. So I was explaining this to someone that I was involved with. I don't yell. At least I certainly try not to. It takes a whole lot to get me to yell, to get me to a point where if I'm in a relationship with someone, I'm yelling. And the majority of the time, my defense mechanism is I stop talking and I'm quiet. And the reason that I do that is because I've been in a relationship where my smart mouth got the best of me and I said things and I saw the immediate pain in this person's eyes that I cared so much for. And I realized that once that was said, I couldn't take it back and he couldn't unhear it. And I was young. I was in my 20s. I was young at the time. And it was such a valuable lesson for me because nobody has to bend to my will or my perception of the world or my take on anything. We all have the freedom to believe the way that we want to believe and live our lives the way that we see fit. The compromise comes because you care for a person or you care for a group of people, you care for your family, you care for your coworkers. You understand that I need to keep my desk clean because it bothers Sally because she absolutely has to have a meticulous desk. Or, you can put it in any scenario. Or how about when you're at the grocery store and, everybody knows when you're going down the aisle, you stay to the right side of the aisle. And then you come to that one person that's on the left and they're holding everybody up and everybody's getting irritated. Okay, they are just trying to pick up some canned green beans and they're going to be out of the way in just a second. It's not that everybody needs to move out of your way. We've all played chicken in the grocery store wondering who was going to move first. It's kind of fun.
Sure.
But it can be something as simple as the interaction that you have on the road or in a store, or it can be something as serious and personal as the relationship that you have with the person that you're spending your life with. Forgiveness is key in every one of those scenarios, and forgiveness isn't for them. If you cut me off on the road, I don't need to pull up and say, "Hey, Tim, I forgive you."
Yeah, that won't get you far. That's what you do. That's what you do. You pull up really fast behind me and you honk the horn and you signal me off the road so that you can walk up to the car and say, "Hey, it's really all right that you cut me off." That will get you dead, honestly.
Forgiveness is for us. It's for us to move on and evolve and be able to tap into our compassion and understand that nobody's perfect. We all have flaws. And so when we don't forgive, the opposite of that happens. We become judgmental, we become bitter, we become angry, and that can have a physical effect on us like no other.
That is a fascinating point. Because remember how we've talked about the story we tell ourselves and how that is such an intrinsic part of our experience in life? We tell ourselves this story, and in the story maybe we're the hero, maybe we're the villain, oftentimes we're the victim. Anyone who chooses to withhold forgiveness is by definition playing the role of the victim. By playing the role of the victim, you are looking to be victimized. By looking to be victimized, you find victimization. Withholding forgiveness equals you will be victimized.
That's interesting. I never thought of it from that perspective.
Withholding forgiveness is just the worst thing that you can do to yourself. That's the worst thing you can do to yourself. By holding on to those past pains, those past scars, you prevent yourself from engaging in a narrative about your life that allows you to be free of being the victim. It's one thing to be victimized. I'm not a victim blamer. Crappy things happen to people. Absolutely they do. But at that point, you've got a choice. Do I forgive, let this go, or do I hold on to this and make it a major part of the narrative, the story that I'm constantly telling myself about the experience that I'm having? By holding on to it and continuing to tell yourself about your victimization, now you are choosing victimhood as a long-term mechanism for living your life.
That's fascinating. I agree with that. And nobody can succeed if they have more of a victim mentality. If everything is done to you, as opposed to you are creating a life for yourself where you are able. I read this book one time. It's called Remembering Wholeness. And this point just popped into my head and I love it. It's by Carol Tuttle. And she's a Reiki master. She does a lot of energy work. And she wrote this fascinating book. It was probably the very first book that I ever read that got me on the path that I'm on today of helping people and wanting them to see a more beautiful experience in life. There is a chapter where you stand, you close your eyes, and you imagine yourself on a stage. And everyone that is in your life and everyone that you know and everyone that plays a role, you invite them to join you on stage. So imagine now that you're surrounded by everyone on the stage with you. And one by one, they come up. So you're standing in the middle of the stage looking at all of these people. One by one, they come up to you and you tell them the role that you value that they play in your life. And you explain to them in this exercise what you need them to be for you. And it allows you on a conscious and a very subconscious level to identify whether or not the relationships you have with the people in your life are good, or if you need to dismiss them from the stage. And in that exercise, you have the opportunity to forgive people that have been in your life but show up on this stage. And they may not be there anymore. It may be a situation like your father or my father where they've passed on and you can't sit down with them and have that conversation. So we know that in this exercise, none of those people are in that exercise with you. This is all taking place in your mind and in your thoughts and in your heart. But you come out of this exercise on the other side feeling like you just took an energetic shower. Like it is so cleansing and so fulfilling because you have finally put people where they need to be in your heart and in your mind. And if they can't be there, if the guy I dated when I was 19 years old shows up on that stage and he can't be there anymore, it's okay for me to dismiss him. I haven't talked to him in 15, 16, 17 years, but he's not there anymore. I dismissed him because his part in my play or my story is over. So the truth of that is that's a very visual exercise to allow you to forgive people, and it has nothing to do with them. And it's phenomenal. It's an amazing book. I would recommend it. At one point I had 3 copies and I gave 2 copies out. And so I have 1 left, but it is an amazing book. It's filled with love and how you recreate self-love and how you recreate patterns of love with everyone that you associate with.
Excellent.
So yeah, I agree. You can't be a victim. And I never even looked at that perspective before. You have to take control of your own life and create the reality that is best for you. And that includes letting go of people or things or memories that don't serve you and don't serve the stronger side of you that you want to evolve.
That reminds me of a psychological exercise that I've actually done a couple of times over the years with different continuing education programs that I've been engaged in, where we would do this thing called Gestalt psychodrama after the Gestalt School of Psychology from years ago, where essentially you would sit face to face in facing chairs with another person, and the facilitator will bring the lights down, and then you will sit and talk to that other person as though they were, in fact, your father, your ex-lover, your old boyfriend, old girlfriend, whatever it is. Creepy old guy from down the block who you used to harass, right? You used to like, you kids get out of my yard. You'd throw eggs at his house on Halloween, and then the poor old guy was up there cleaning eggs off and he fell and broke a hip. Died a few years later. This is not a real story, by the way. I'm making this up.
I'm like, oh my gosh, that's horrible.
And you never let it go. You just felt so bad for being such an ignorant little poop to that sweet old man. His grandchildren miss him. Anyway, so in Gestalt psychodrama, you have this opportunity to sit, and so maybe there's another a gentleman in the group who is a little elderly, he's a little older than you, and so you can sit there, be yourself, and this older gentleman will come and sit in the chair straight across from you and bring the house lights down so that you're sitting there face to face in a very small and intimate group typically, and you just tell him, I'm so sorry we did those horrible things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what you're able to do is, as we've discussed before, your brain does not know, your psyche, your conscious, subconscious, does not know the difference between a conjured or imagined activity and a real one. That's why fantasy is so powerful. That's why going to the movies is so much fun, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're perfectly safe in the movie, but man, when that chick starts floating up and the Ouija board's moving by itself and you're freaking out, you're not really freaking out. You're safe. You're not really in some 1970s basement that you'll likely never get out of. Really, you're in a nice air-conditioned theater and there's a Dr. Pepper close at hand. But your brain struggles to tell the difference, and thus you can be profoundly entertained or educated and enlightened, right? And so what you'll do is you'll sit there and you will talk to that person who is, the little old man from down the street, or maybe he's your dad. And you're saying, look, Dad, why didn't you support me growing up? Why this? Why that? You have these questions. This person does not respond to you. You just come up with your own answers, right? And it usually ends in kind of a blubbering mess and a bunch of hugs. Sounds really touchy-feely, but it's incredibly effective at effectively rewriting your story. You can rewrite your story. You can gain a sense of understanding. You can become willing to forgive and let it go. Now, to your point, you let it go by virtue of going through the exercise. The person that you're letting it go with, that person's not even there. It's like some other guy, some other lady, some other girl, woman who's sitting in proxy for your psychological image of the person that you need to forgive and that needs to forgive you, right? And so you're right. Forgiveness is purely for ourselves. We do not even need the other person there. They don't have to be present. They don't have to be aware. They don't have to pull us over on the freeway and jump out of the car and run and say, I forgive you, here's a coffee, right?
I promise not to try that on the Arizona freeways.
Let's not, seriously. I've heard really bad stories. Anyways, yeah, probably a bad idea.
Okay.
Nonetheless, you don't need that person there. The brain is such a fascinating thing to me, as I'm sure we're all well aware, because I never stop talking about it, because you got to understand, in this world, your story is defined by the events that happen to you, but not just the events, your interpretation of the event, right? Mm-hmm. Like, what happened to you might be completely different than your interpretation. If you don't believe that, go see a movie that you loved 20, 25 years ago that was just, oh my gosh, it's Pretty in Pink and Molly Ringwald, and it's just the cutest little, and then, 45 minutes into it, it's like, God, this is just stupid, right? No offense to the Pretty in Pink fans. Just fill in whatever your movie was, right? Some Kind of Wonderful, Mary Stuart Masterson, right? She's just so adorable, and this is such a cute, sweet, uplifting movie. I just absolutely love it. Oh my gosh, this is idiotic.
Okay, I like all those movies.
I know you think you do, but you're remembering. You need to watch them again and see. Here's what happens. Something happens, you interpret that something that happens. Your interpretation may or may not be accurate. Once interpreted, though, it gets laid down on the hard drive, and now it becomes a memory. Every time you reminisce, you retell the story to yourself or others. You literally recreate a brand new copy, okay? Mm-hmm. When I sit here and tell you about I did it earlier in this conversation. I'm talking about being out at sea with Dad and the boat and the whole thing, right? So were the waves 2.5 times as big as the boat? Were they as big as the boat? Well, I don't remember. All I remember is what the new version of the story says, because I overwrite the old version. Very much like on a hard drive on a computer. If I go in and I read my memoirs again, and I change a few commas, periods, add a couple of words, and then save it again, that new version completely overwrites the old version and the old version disappears. That's how memories work. Okay. And so the more you reminisce, the more you retell, oh, the funniest thing happened to us when we were kids, blah, 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 the further from what actually happened you get, just by the very definition of the fact that each time there are tiny little errors in memory or judgment or the retelling of the story. And those new tiny little errors become the new norm. They become the new high water mark, and then you tell it again and you change that one, and you got a new high water mark. You tell it again, you change it again. Eventually, God willing, you live long enough, you're a 120-year-old lady talking to your great-great-great-grandchildren, and it's, whoa, when I remember back when President Trump was president and blah, blah, blah. None of that crap's true, right? None of that happened because you've told and retold the story so many times that the reality of what happened bears scant resemblance to the story you're now telling. And that's just how we work, right? You have the flaw of interpretation, and then you have the continued flaws of telling and retelling the story. Now, that is terrible if you are a historian, but if you want to patch up and repair psychological problems in your life, errors in thinking that you've picked up along the way, greatest thing God ever thought of. Absolutely. Because it could be, I was that, 17, 18-year-old little girl, first semester in college and got raped. Okay? Mm-hmm. Now, I can hold on to that story. I was victimized, but does that entitle me to victimhood status for the balance of my life? Well, if I hold on to it, yes, it probably does. And rightfully so. If you want to be the victim, be the victim. That is fine, right? It doesn't serve your purpose, but nobody can take it away from you, right?
Right.
But if you go into a therapeutic type situation where through Gestalt psychodrama or through whatever this lady's doing with the book that you're talking about, this Tuttle woman, and you are able to slowly reinvent the story. You go back, you're on the Freudian couch, you're retelling what happened, and then through the suggestions of the therapist or just through your own mind, you're able to change subtle little things about it.
Right.
Was that a red dress? Was it a pink dress? Oh, it was a pink dress. Was it a pink dress or was it a pink jogging suit? It was a pink jogging suit. And as you continue, because even as I'm saying those words, you're visualizing those images, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
You went from red dress to pink jogging suit. Okay? That's the power of changing the direction of your subconscious, your memories, and your mind. At any given time, you can just turn. You can pivot and make it into something new that serves your ultimate goal. And that is a fantastic thing. Ultimately, through enough retelling of that story, it still exists, it still happened, it was still painful, but you have reconditioned the story to the point that it simply doesn't hurt you or hinder you, hold you back anymore. Just takes a little bit of work.
Well, and it's funny that you mentioned that because I know that I mentioned Louise Hay in a previous podcast because I love her content. It's all motivational and it's about healing your life and healing yourself and positive intention. And she literally is the grandma of positive intentions. So her life started out as she was molested as a child.
Right.
And it was very impactful. And it was very, obviously, it would be for anyone. And it was very impactful, but instead of being the victim, she decided to live in a space of love and forgiveness and create this motivational website, this company, Hay House. They publish motivational books, inspirational books. She chose a different path for herself, and the people that she's impacted and the things that she's done with her life are profound. So she chose to turn her very bad start and the awful things that happened to her into something that enabled her to provide love and forgiveness and teach others to do the same for much less of an experience in a lot of cases.
Right.
So yes, when you talk about that, yeah, if you want to be the victim and you want to hold on to something, it absolutely will prevent you from moving forward, but it absolutely is your choice. If you can let go, if you can let go of the anger and the resentment that comes from not forgiving and turn around and forgive, it's more for you than anybody else. But in addition to that, it will create an opportunity. It will create a void in your life that you can fill with peace and love. I think we really hit on a lot of important things, and I love the fact that we really discussed that forgiveness is more for us. You know, it brought up the thought of the quote, "Your opinion of me is none of my business." You need to forgive people for the actions that they take that potentially harm you. Absolutely get out of the situation. Move out of the way, move into the other lane, get off the freeway, whatever you need to do, get out of it. You don't stay and forgive and forgive and forgive for the same actions. But you do have the opportunity to forgive and move on. And it's for yourself, not for the person that did you harm.
I think that's all there is. All right. Well, so it sounds like we need to wrap it up.
Sounds good.
Thanks, everybody, for showing up. As always, we really appreciate you. If you have any questions or feedback, please reach out to us, and we look forward to hearing that commentary as well. In closing, always remember, never forget, dream your life.
And live your dreams.
Talk to you next time.
Bye-bye.